Emma Carter reached the third floor faster than she planned, her shoes tapping sharply against the quiet hallway as if they were pushing her forward before her mind could catch up, and when she stopped in front of the small conference room, she expected nothing more than silence and an empty table, a place where she could gather her thoughts after a long and heavy morning, but the moment she opened the door, her breath stalled and her body went still, because the room was not empty, and standing near the window were two people who belonged to a past she had carefully locked away, Daniel Wright and Sophie Miller, framed by soft daylight as if the moment had been arranged without her permission, Daniel's posture stiff but familiar, Sophie's hands folded in front of her like she was bracing for impact, and in that second Emma felt time fold in on itself, memories rushing in fast and sharp, reminding her of shared laughter, quiet arguments, promises that ended without closure, and friendships that faded without explanation, and though no one spoke at first, the silence itself felt loud, pressing against her chest until she wondered if they could hear her heart racing. Daniel turned toward her slowly, surprise clear in his eyes, not the polite kind but the honest kind that betrayed emotion before control could return, and Sophie followed his gaze, her face softening in a way that made Emma uneasy, as if relief and regret had collided, and Emma knew she should step back. Apologize, close the door, pretend this was a mistake, but her feet refused to move because something deep inside her recognized this moment as important, even if it frightened her, and she took one step inside, then another, the door closing behind her with a quiet click that felt final. Like a choice made without words, the air between them heavy but not hostile, filled instead with things left unsaid. Daniel cleared his throat as if to speak, then stopped, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. And she noticed details she hadn't expected to notice, the slight lines near his eyes, the calm he carried now, different from the restless man she once knew, and it unsettled her how familiar he still felt. Sophie shifted her weight, breaking the stillness, offering a careful smile that didn't reach her eyes, and Emma understood in that instant that this meeting was no accident of timing alone, something had been happening without her, conversations she wasn't part of, truths she hadn't heard. And the thought made her chest tighten, but instead of anger she felt curiosity, and beneath that, a quiet fear of what she might learn. Daniel finally spoke, his voice steady but low, saying her name like it was something fragile, and that simple sound carried years of history, reminding Emma of late-night talks, shared plans, and the slow way love had slipped into routine before slipping away, and she answered him with a nod, not trusting her voice yet, as they moved toward the table without being asked, sitting across from each other like strangers in a formal meeting while knowing far too much about each other's pasts. The room itself felt ordinary, plain walls, soft lights, nothing dramatic, yet Emma felt like she had stepped onto a stage where her emotions were exposed, and Daniel spoke about schedules and work matters with practiced ease, his words moving fast as if he was trying to outrun the tension, and Emma followed, responding when needed, her tone calm even as her thoughts raced, while Sophie watched them both, quiet but alert, noticing every pause and glance, and Emma realized how strange it was to sit there pretending this was just another meeting when every look carried meaning, when every silence held weight, and as the conversation moved quickly, Emma felt a growing awareness that this moment was not about the past returning, but about something unresolved demanding attention, and when the meeting ended as suddenly as it began, Sophie stood first, her chair scraping lightly against the floor, and said they should talk sometime, her voice gentle but serious, and Emma nodded, unsure whether that future talk would bring clarity or pain, and Daniel walked toward the door with Emma, pausing just long enough to say her name again, then stopping, choosing silence over words, and that silence followed Emma out of the room, down the hallway, and into her thoughts, because she knew then that seeing them together was only the beginning, and whatever had surprised her in that room was not finished yet, not even close. After leaving the conference room, Emma walked quickly through the hallway, but the calm look on her face hid the storm in her thoughts, and by the time she reached the parking lot, she already knew that pretending nothing had happened would not work, because Daniel's presence had reopened feelings she believed were settled, and Sophie's quiet watchful eyes had made it clear that more was going on than a simple work meeting, and later that afternoon Emma returned to her desk, trying to focus, yet every task felt rushed, every sound too loud, and when her phone buzzed with a short message from Sophie asking if they could talk later, Emma hesitated only a moment before agreeing, because avoiding the truth had already cost her too much in the past, and they met that evening at a small cafe near the river where the lights were soft and the noise low, and Sophie spoke first, explaining how she had met Daniel again by chance months ago, How they had talked often, not about romance but about growth, regrets, and unfinished emotions, and as Sophie spoke, Emma listened without interrupting, noticing how her friend's voice stayed calm even when her hands trembled slightly, and Emma realized that Sophie wasn't hiding anything now, she was choosing honesty, and that honesty hurt. But it also cleared the fog that had confused Emma since the morning, and Sophie admitted she had worried about this meeting, worried that Emma would feel replaced or betrayed, but she insisted that nothing had crossed a line, and Emma believed her, not because she wanted comfort, but because Sophie's words carried weight, and when the conversation ended, Emma walked home alone under the city lights, thinking about how life rarely gives clean endings, and how emotions don't follow rules, and that night's sleep came late, her mind replaying Daniel's face. The way he had looked surprised to see her, not prepared, not distant, and days passed quickly after that, filled with work and routine, yet something remained unfinished. And when Daniel finally sent her a message asking to talk, Emma stared at her phone for a long time, feeling fear and relief at once, knowing that silence had protected her before but had also kept her stuck, and she replied with a simple yes, and they met in a quiet public space, choosing neutral ground like two people trying to be careful with something fragile, and Daniel spoke honestly, saying he had never planned to appear in her life again, but when he did, he realized that what they shared still mattered, not as a memory, but as a lesson that shaped who he had become, and Emma listened closely, feeling the weight of his words but also sensing that he was not asking for forgiveness or a second chance, only understanding, and she told him about her own growth, about how she had learned to stand alone, about how she had stopped blaming herself for the ending of their relationship, and as they talked, the tension eased, replaced by a quiet connection that felt familiar yet different, more mature, less urgent, and when they finally stood to leave, Emma felt lighter, not because answers were complete, but because the truth had been spoken, and as they walked away in opposite directions, Emma understood that part 2 of this story was not about reunion or regret, but about facing emotions without running, and that choice, simple as it seemed, had already begun to change what would come next. The days after meeting Daniel moved quickly, yet each hour felt full, as if Emma's life had shifted slightly off its old path, and she noticed small changes in herself, like the way she paid more attention to the world around her or paused longer before reacting, and one evening while walking home from work she realized she was no longer replaying the past with pain but with clarity, understanding now that time had not erased her feelings but had reshaped them into something calmer and stronger, and when Sophie called again, Emma answered without hesitation, meeting her friend at a quiet bookstore cafe where the smell of coffee and paper softened the mood, and Sophie spoke openly about how strange it felt to stand between two people she cared about, admitting she feared losing Emma more than anything else, and Emma reached across the table, reassuring her that honesty had protected their friendship rather than broken it, and that trust mattered more than confusion, and afterward Emma felt a deep sense of relief, like a knot slowly loosening, and later that night Daniel sent another message, not urgent, not heavy, just a simple note asking how her day had been, and Emma replied honestly, surprised by how natural it felt, and their conversation flowed easily, touching on work, books, travel, and lessons learned, avoiding the past yet acknowledging it without fear, and as days turned into weeks, their messages became part of Emma's routine, never demanding, never crossing boundaries, but always thoughtful, and Emma found herself smiling at her phone more often than she expected, not because she was falling back into old habits, but because she recognized a connection built on respect rather than need, and one weekend Daniel suggested a walk in the park where families gathered and music drifted from a distant street performer, and Emma agreed, choosing daylight and open space, wanting clarity instead of confusion, and during that walk they spoke about how differently they saw the world now, how mistakes had shaped them, how they no longer wanted to rush life, and Emma noticed how Daniel listened more than he spoke, how he allowed silence to exist without filling it, and that quiet presence touched her deeply, and at one point they stopped near a lake, watching sunlight ripple across the water, and Daniel admitted that seeing her again had reminded him of who he used to be and who he still wanted to become, not for her, but for himself, and Emma felt emotion rise, not overwhelming but steady, and she shared her own truth, that she had learned to choose herself, to value peace over drama, and that love now meant safety and understanding rather than intensity alone, and Daniel accepted her words without argument, without pressure, and that acceptance made her trust him more than any promise ever could, and as they continued meeting in simple ways, coffee breaks, short walks, shared laughter, Emma realized part 3 of her story was not about deciding whether to return to love, but about realizing she no longer feared it, because she knew she would not lose herself again. And one evening as she sat alone at home, city lights glowing outside her window, Emma reflected on how unexpected connections can return not to repeat old endings, but to test how much someone has grown, and she understood that whatever happened next, she was ready, not because she needed Daniel in her life, but because she had found balance within herself, and that quiet strength became the foundation of everything that followed. The final shift came quietly, without drama, on an evening when the city felt calm and open, and Emma met Daniel at the park where their earlier walk had ended, the sky soft with fading light and the air cool enough to feel refreshing, and from the moment they began walking, Emma sensed that this meeting was different, not because of tension, but because of clarity, and Daniel spoke with honesty, saying he had thought deeply about what reconnecting meant and had decided that whatever happened next should be built slowly and carefully, with respect for the people they had become rather than the memories they once shared, and Emma appreciated his words because they matched her own thoughts, and she told him that seeing him again had not confused her life but had helped her understand her heart better, reminding her that growth did not erase love, it refined it. And as they walked past families, couples, and friends enjoying the evening, Emma felt grounded, aware that love existed in many forms and did not need to be rushed or dramatic to be real, and Daniel asked her what she wanted now, not what she missed, and that question stayed with her for a moment as she considered how far she had come, how she had learned to stand steady on her own, and she answered honestly, saying she wanted something real, peaceful, and patient, something that allowed space to breathe, and Daniel nodded, accepting her answer without trying to shape it, and they sat on a bench overlooking the city, watching lights come alive one by one, and Daniel admitted that he no longer feared being alone but still valued connection, and Emma recognized that as maturity, not distance, and when he said he would understand if she chose to walk away, Emma felt respect instead of pressure, and she told him that continuing did not mean repeating the past, it meant starting fresh with clearer eyes, and that statement felt like a turning point, not a promise, but a direction, and as the evening deepened, they stood and walked toward the exit of the park, not holding hands, not rushing, simply moving together with shared understanding, and Emma realized that what had surprised her in that room weeks ago had evolved into something steady and intentional, and when they reached the gate, Daniel paused and asked if they could keep seeing each other, slowly, honestly, and Emma agreed, feeling calm rather than overwhelmed, and as they parted ways, she felt no need for dramatic closure, because the story was no longer about shock or confusion, but about choice, and walking home under the city lights, Emma smiled softly, knowing that life had continued in a way she never expected, not by forcing the past to return, but by allowing two grown hearts to meet again with patience, courage, and hope, and in that understanding, the story found its quiet, meaningful ending.